What I like best about being a writer, I'm able to figure out how I feel. I think it was Flannery O'Connor who said, I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. And that's exactly how I feel. My emotions are best expressed on paper, and that I'm not even cognizant of how I feel until I write it and I read it back to myself and I say, oh my God, is that how I really feel? And I have to say yes. I feel like if you think of a story as a hamburger, which is what I do, I like my hamburger to be rare. So the best part, the juiciest part, is the middle of the hamburger. So it has to be a little cooked on top, a little cooked in the bottom to have some sort of balance. But in the middle, you get all the juice and the flavor. And so that's what I always write first, the juice. And then I fill in at the end, the beginning and the end.
This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Rolling on 6 now. On 6.
Welcome to episode 41. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast, or if you had your own success in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, please write me. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Thanks for leaving me a short message about the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Once again, the email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Ali Berlinski, author of A Beautiful Mess, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast. It's great having you with me today.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Ali, what part of the world do you live in?
I currently live in Spain, in northern Spain.
How'd you get there?
On a plane.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
No, it's so easy. I'm a huge fan of dad jokes. I started out in New Jersey, which is where I was born. So I was raised bicoastal, New Jersey, California. I went to university in New York, worked there a few years after college while I did my graduate work and worked as a teacher. Decided, hey, I want to learn Spanish. I would like to live abroad a few years and have some sort of experience outside of my own culture, write a book. And so that's what I did. I moved to Spain. I quit my job. I got a job here, started learning Spanish, and wrote a book. And now I'm here.
Are you fluent in Spanish yet?
I think anyone who doesn't speak a different language from birth and learns a different language as an adult will agree with me when I say that that's impossible. If you want to be fluent in another language, then I think you have to be kind of intuitive to the other language. And as much as I'm very good at expressing myself in Spanish, it's definitely not to the extent that I'm fluid and fluent in English. Mm-hmm.
And you grew up biracial.
Yes.
Give me a little bit on that.
My family were like the modern family. My mother's Filipino, but she was raised in the United States. My father's German and Polish. He has family that came over on the Mayflower, so he's like true Americana. But then I had a stepfather who was Puerto Rican, a stepmother who was also Filipino, but an immigrant. My brother's family, not my family, but through my brothers, they're Italian. So I would kind of grew up with this whole modge podge of culture. It was fantastic. But at the same time, I grew up thinking that I was Puerto Rican and that I was Italian, not realizing it doesn't work that way.
Do you have a name for all the different backgrounds that you came from?
Definitely. I think that's one of the best things about being biracial. You get to play a lot with the language. What I've come up with is that I'm Polapina, a Polish Filipina.
In the 70s, we had a comedian named Freddie Prinze. His mother was Hungarian, his father was Puerto Rican. He called himself a Hungarican.
I love it!
You struggled with being biracial through your adolescence, but as a young woman now, you know it's a very cool thing.
I I personally have always felt very unique and special and proud of my heritage. I agree. I think right now it's more than ever very posh or, somewhat cool to be biracial because, there's the stereotype that mixed people have the best looking babies, which, I'm biased, I would agree. But then you see things like the Cheerios ad and the backlash of having just a mixed family. And that shocked me. It really did. I thought that there was nothing wrong with that commercial and had such a strong, strong reaction.
And now you publish a book called A Beautiful Mess. Is it all from your perspective, or do you interweave other people and incidents in your book? I ask because I'm always curious to know how you write about what you know without always writing about yourself.
I think that's a very interesting question. I would definitely say that I use my personal experiences as a backdrop for what I really want to talk about, which is culture and relationships, because I think that's what a lot of people are very interested in these days. Even though the book is about my personal relationships and my personal experiences, I do think that I just use them as a way to open the door to talk about the things like race, divorce, what it's like to live abroad and outside of your own culture, what it's like to have family members that are sick. I do think that it is more about social things than my personal life.
Lest we not leave out the fact that Facebook protrudes itself into our lives more than we care to admit.
Oh, yeah, right. I wish I could be a writer these days without Facebook, but I really don't think it's possible professionally.
But if you use it intelligently to write about what you do, to write about the book you published, then it becomes a valuable tool.
I definitely agree with you, but at the same time, I would say that there's a fine line between genius and madness. Part of me agrees that to be a writer these days, it's definitely necessary to have a Facebook profile, not only for your personal self as a writer, but for your book. But then at the same time, because we're so connected all the time, it's almost like a condition. Like I feel like I'm kind of sick. I have to check my Facebook every day. If I don't check it, if I don't make progress, if I don't have so many posts or visits, then, I feel like I've done something wrong. And that's just sick. It's so sad, but that's how I feel.
In other words, you break out into a cold sweat.
Right. Like, oh my God, what did I do differently today? Why did so many people like my post last time? And why didn't they like my post this time?
How did you come up with the title?
The title, one of the chapters in the book is called A Beautiful Mess. The title was given to me. One of my ex-boyfriends, his nickname for me was A Beautiful Mess, which I think is entirely appropriate because if you imagine the girl who always seems to have toothpaste or food in her hair or some sort of food on her shirt, like the Liz Lemon kind of character who's always just a disaster, but so endearing in her disaster that she's a beautiful. That's why he nicknamed me A Beautiful Mess. And I just thought that it was so appropriate given that so many aspects of my life were very similar in that they were just a complete disaster. Some ways good disaster, in some ways a bad disaster. Because it's my life, obviously, it's a beautiful mess to me.
Tell me more about your book.
A Beautiful Mess, it follows my life to present-day Spain. It talks about a lot of the struggles I had growing up, being biracial, being bicoastal, from divorced parents, and what that was like, having two families that I was bouncing between, and all the sorts of things that come with any kind of family. Sibling rivalry, trying to figure out your identity, trying to figure out how to live as a person who has a different background than other people. Like my peers had very different lifestyles, family makeups, but it also talks about my adolescence, what it was like falling in love, what it was like losing somebody for the first time, because one of the things that I experienced is in the book is one of my ex-boyfriends passed away. There's a lot of things that people relate to as far as what it's like to lose somebody and what it's like to have people come in and out of your life. There's a lot of themes in the book that aren't necessarily family-based, but are also romantic that will appeal to a lot of people who are my age.
Was it difficult for you growing up biracial?
Looking back, perhaps it wasn't as difficult as it could have been because I hear a lot of stories about people who really, really struggled with their identity. I definitely did. People probably make assumptions as to how you fit into your family. Because I know that definitely when I was with my white family, part of me felt like, okay, I'm definitely the adopted child. And I remember I would look through my birth records and try and figure out if I was adopted, half wanting to be adopted because, you think maybe my real parents are rich or maybe I'm some sort of princess. It turns out I'm not. I'm definitely my mother and father's daughter, especially when you look at our characters.
What do you like best about being a writer?
What I like best about being a writer, I'm able to figure out how I feel. I think it was Flannery O'Connor who said, I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. And that's exactly how I feel. My emotions are best expressed on paper, and that I'm not even cognizant of how I feel until I write it and I read it back to myself and I say, oh my God, is that how I really feel? And I have to say yes.
Of all the genres available to a writer today, why did you pick personal essays?
When I was in high school, my high school teacher gave us an assignment, and it was to read Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. It was the first time I've ever read a book that did exactly what I've always wanted to do, which is to take parts of your life and to relate it back to society and culture and something that's poignant for other people. And I just found such a great sense of comfort in her stories that I felt like, well, maybe I could write stories about my life and then other people could read them and have the same experience. And then I got to college and I found David Sedaris. I fell in love. He was able to use comedy and humor and satire in a way that Joan Didion did. I think my writing is probably a happy marriage between the both of them, where I'm very sarcastic on the one hand, but I'm also very sentimental on the other. That's probably why I chose this genre, because I felt like I had the strongest connection to them. And also, fun fact, David Sedaris and I have the same birthday, so I think it's rather kismet.
When do you think of ideas for your stories?
I know that I'm a writer because I know that my brain works in short story form. I think that's important. The arcs in my writing are very short, and I think that is another reason why I would never be a novelist, the reason why I write short essays, because if you asked me to plan a novel, I would fail miserably. Writing a short story, it's much easier for me to focus and to condense. For me, if I'm at the gym, if I hear something I find interesting, then it's subject to my whimsy and I write a story. Anything I find to be bizarre or funny about culture, I use.
When you write essays, are you still able to write or borrow from the traditional ideas or concepts of plot, characterization, character peculiarities, and things like this?
Definitely. I think it's very important to have the tools any writer has, which is to lay the story out in a way that keeps the writer invested. It's something that every writer, whether you're a fiction writer or you're a nonfiction writer, you have to know how to do that. Whether that's with opening with a question or a dialogue or something peculiar, you have to know how to hook the reader. And you have to know how to end a story, and you have to know how to develop the characters and the story so that the reader doesn't get to the end of it and realize they've just wasted their time.
Do you feel pressure within yourself to come up with all the standard issue devices, characterization, plot, or peculiarities? Is it more difficult in a shorter timeline to do this, or do you have no problem with that at all? In effect, just condensing your timeline.
I think I probably condensed the timeline down. I am not at all a fan of long-winded writing. If it's interesting, I put it in the story. Obviously, using characterization, all those things, it adds depth to a story. But certain writers, such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who I respect but do not care for, they add lots and lots and lots of detail that perhaps are unnecessary. So I try to refrain from doing that.
Finish this sentence. I love to write because
it helps me think clearly. I don't think that I could stop writing. Even if I were to never publish again or to share any of my writings again, I would continue writing because it's my sanity.
It frees your mind.
Definitely. I think my brain is possibly more active right when I'm about to go to sleep than during the day. And so all of my stories scream to be written right as I'm supposed to be going to bed. If I don't write, I don't sleep.
Are you an outliner or do you write organically?
I do a little bit of both. It's important to have an outline to begin with. Obviously, rules are meant to be broken when they need to be broken. If I feel very passionate about something, I feel like I'll just write it and then I can go back and give it more structure, or vice versa. If I have an idea